We're ready now to make the stew itself, and so I'm going to start with the meat that we have over here. And as you can see, we've cut the meat, and it's cut in little pieces, and we're going to use half of this meat for the stew and half of it for the sausage that we're going to make.
And that's the dried meat that we've been
This is the dried meat that we've been drying on the drying rack. And usually people dried their meat to preserve it, and so this is usually what they would have started from unless they had a fresh kill. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to put half of this into the mix that we're going to be making for the stew.
And it's not completely dry yet, but it is dried.
It's not totally dried, and the others is on there right now, and it should be drying probably by the end of the day, but we're just going to put a little bit of the meat in there and start out with that. Cover this up again with the bark. Now these are the things that we've gathered this morning that we're going to go ahead and put in here. We're going to put in these goosefoot leaves, and Chris, if you want to help me break these up. Instead of putting the whole plant in, I just like to pick the leaves and put the leaves in, so we're going to take the leaves off and just put them in.
Now, you're worried about size on this, or?
No. You can just put them in like that. The younger ones are tender, like we said, and so we just want to pick the leaves off. The stems are kind of really fibery, and you don't really want to eat those. So we're going to take the stems off and just put in the little tender leaves. And here I'm going to let Chris work on that. And I'm also going to add these plantain leaves in here. I like to put a lot of greens in it. They add a lot of vitamin and mineral content. Right here we've had some reconstituted squash from last year's harvest, and we reconstituted it, and there's some corn in there too.
What kind of squash?
And this is an Indian squash. It's the kind the Mandans have grown, and here at the Sacagawea Center they have a heritage garden, and they grow a lot of these.
Can I see one?
Yeah, sure.
They grow a lot of those here?
Yeah, they grow a lot of these native vegetables and things like that here, so we like to get these whenever we can and use them when we're making something. So I'm going to get a handful of this. I'm going to put quite a bit of this.
And you've added some corn.
In my mix. I've added some corn to it. And the rest of this I'm going to leave in here, and I'm going to use it for the sausage when we make the sausage. So I'm just going to take some more of this out and put it in there. One of the recipes that I liked that we tried out of a book called Feasting and Fasting with Lewis and Clark was a recipe called Mandan vegetable soup. And in the Mandan soup they had added cherries to their recipe, and so I'm going to go ahead and just try this out and add these currants, these are fresh currants. I'm going to add these to this soup just to see what kind of flavor it would make. This is kind of an experiment. What do you think that would do? You think it would taste good?
I don't know. I think it's going to be great.
We'll find out. Yeah, I think it's going to be great. It's interesting. I used to be really afraid to experiment with flavors, and Joe is the one who usually can imagine how this is going to taste or how that's going to taste. But I'm getting a little adventurous now, especially with this type of thing, using the wild plants, the things that I find around. I'm getting a little adventurous and able to combine a little more than I used to before. These are some choke cherries that we gathered and dried last year, and they're dried the way the people around this area used to dry them. They're just pounded on a rock, and pounding on the rock and drying in the sun will get rid of the cyanic acid. And I'm going to add these. These are sweet now, and they have a little bit of an almond flavor, and I'm going to add some of that in there too. I really enjoy the choke cherries prepared in this way, and they're good to eat just plain. I could feed one to Chris, she could eat one. You like that? It's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I
It's a
think I'll
different
eat some
taste,
too.
though.
The best part of cooking is when you get to eat while you're doing it.
That's the truth.
Actually, the squash is really good if you want to eat that too.
Yep.
This is some watercress that we've gathered today, and we're just going to take the leaves off and add the leaves here. Now we're going to add some of this alfalfa. This one's a little wilted because we had it out in the sun a little bit. You can't really tell what the plant looks like very much because it's so wilted, but here's where the flowering area would be, and these are the 3 leaves that are kind of characteristic of this plant. And we're just going to put some of the leaves in the stew here. Early people needed to get as many vitamins and minerals as they could. And an interesting thing is this goosefoot here is high in oxalates, and oxalates are not really good for you to have a lot of in your body. And one of the things that we do when we use a plant that's high in oxalates in one of our stews, we'll counterbalance that with something that has a lot of calcium in it. So over here for our tea, I have a nettles plant, which I I will pick up with this curly dock leaf. And this nettles plant is very, very high in calcium. And so what I'll be doing is balancing the oxates from this stew, because I'm putting a lot of goosefoot in here, with the calcium from my tea, which is going to be from this nettles plant right here. So I think we just about have everything added. I'm going to go ahead and add some of this wild mustard into my mix for my soup, because I hadn't done that yet. So I'm just going to take some of these wild mustard leaves. They're better when they're tiny, and I like to use them when they're smaller, and I'm just going to put a few of those in here. They actually have a little bit of a peppery flavor, the seeds do, that you see over here. They're not fully developed yet, so we're just going to put some of the leaves in there. And this will add some flavor to it. And then I'm also going to be putting some of this in my mixture for the sausage. We're about ready to start on our sausage now, and we already have the meat that we've minced up into very small pieces, and this is the same meat that we had on the jerky rack, and it's about dried and not quite all the way, but good enough for this, so we're going to start with that base. And I'm going to add some wild mustard into this to give it some flavor. And I just like to use the little leaves from this, and we picked this morning here. Don't need too many of them, just enough for a little bit of flavor. And we're going to add some watercress in this too, and the watercress has kind of a peppery flavor. So this is the same kind of squash we put in the soup, and we're just going to cut this up into smaller pieces. Okay, I'm chopping this up into little fine pieces, and I'm using this really awesome knife that Joe made for me. He forged this blade in his primitive knife making shop there at the house, and you have an antler handle on it, and it really feels really good in your hand. It's got a really good shape, so I like to use it, and I'm just going to cut up this squash with that, and just fine enough to be able to mix in with the other things for our sausage. Okay, I'm going to add some choke cherry in here too, some of the choke cherry cakes. Do you want to break one up in there? And just break them up small and put them in there, and you guys can actually... Okay, so I'm going to wash this cattail up, and these little spikes that grow out of the cattail root on the very bottom are new shoots coming up, and if you catch them before they hit the sunlight, they're really tasty. And they, this is a tiny one, but here's a bigger one. And we're going to cut this up and add this to our stew. And those are really good. They're kind of hard to harvest. The roots are kind of hard to harvest. You have to get really in there and dig. But if you happen to pull one up and you've got these on it, they're kind of, aren't they tasty?
Yeah, that is
They're good. So, the cattail, that was really good. The cattail, and I guess that's why I carry my food storage around my neck in case I get hungry. I'm always eating. Actually, this is what early people would do, especially in the Mandan villages over there. They would put this on their neck and carry it, because if a warring tribe came over and they had to run, they would have seeds to plant in a new location if they needed to relocate. So this is like food storage around your neck, which I think is a really cool idea. And then they would just be able to plant the seeds wherever they were and grow corn or whatever it was that they had. And so it served a dual purpose. It was very ornamental, as I like it. It's pretty. And it was very practical. Good. Really good. I like it that way. Ornamental and practical. Because if it's not practical, I'm probably not going to wear it. So, okay, the cattail root is good to eat 4 seasons out of the year, and we are going to put some cattail root. It's very fibery and starchy, and it has some, it adds something to your soup if you put it in there. It adds some carbohydrate, which you need, and in early times it wasn't always easy to get a whole lot of carbohydrate. So once you peel it off, you can see it has a very fibery center. Some people don't like to use, oops, how'd that get on there? The fiber, because it is really hard to chew, and even if you boil it down in the soup, it's going to be fibery, because I usually just cut it up in chunks and put it in my soup, and I could use this giant knife for that. So it's small, and I can just eat the whole thing like that, and just put it in there like that. Now some people like to push the fiber out of it. If they're making a bread or something like that, just push the fiber out of it like that, and then just add it to whatever they're making to add that starch to it. especially people in this area, they didn't have squash like the Mandans would have, or people of different areas. They depended a lot on the plants that were growing right here, and they had only this available to them. So, and I'm going to cut some of the tender bottom portion here and put it into the stew. I'm not going to put this part into the sausage, just into the stew. Cut this into little pieces. When you go out and you gather these plants around your neighborhood, and a lot of these plants are going to be in places that are going to be close by you, but you want to make sure that you're not gathering them in a place that might have any type of pollution around it. For example, I never gather on roadsides because there's a lot of carbon monoxide and a lot of drainage going into those ditches there, and so I'm not going to go and gather from a cattail patch that might be by a roadside. You want to make sure it's not by anything that might have pollution in it, or anything that might be a drain for anything that might have something that wouldn't be desirable in it. So usually things that are in an area where there isn't any of that are pretty safe, and you can usually find them around any place that you live, because a lot of these plants that we have here are plants that grow in a lot of different areas, not necessarily just the area that we're in today.